Good morning, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mike Zegadlo. I'm the Chief of Police here at Lewis, and I'm very honored to have an opportunity to talk with faculty about this important topic, actually kind of two important topics that we're going to cover today. We're going to talk a little bit about, and we have seen as part of the assessment and care team and some of the referrals that we get and just kind of general anecdotal interactions and conversations we have with faculty that folks are looking for guidance on how to have conversations with students and maybe even coworkers on challenging topics, on, for instance, asking someone to do something that they don't want to do, like not be a disturbance in class, or perhaps wear a mask if they don't want to wear a mask, or ask someone to stop doing something that they do want to do. And we have some kind of tips and tricks and tools that we use both in training police officers and people like RAs and peer ministers that we think could be useful if those conversations are challenging for you. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, provide kind of a little toolbox, communication toolbox for having difficult conversations. And then that's going to kind of grow into being able to assess for students or community members who may be kind of evolving into something more serious, perhaps a threat or risk of violence to the campus. And what are some of the observable behaviors and risk factors that we can consider in evaluating someone who may be on what we describe in threat assessment as a pathway to violence. So that's the kind of quick summary of what we're going to talk about over about the next hour. I am going to share my screen and allow you to see my PowerPoint slides. So when I look back at my personal evolution on this topic, I wasn't always a cop. And frankly, in most of my adult life, did not plan on working in law enforcement. My original career plan was to be a high school history teacher. I was an undergrad here at Lewis in the early 90s. I studied history, got my teaching certificate, and I was kind of a warm and fuzzy guy. You know, I had long hair, I played in a rock band, and like confrontation and enforcement were not my bag at all. And the first time it became apparent to me that this might be a skill set that I needed to cultivate within myself was when I became an RA here, in the early 90s. I was good at the fun parts of being an RA, programming and meeting students and meeting parents and helping people. But I kind of sucked at the part of being an RA where you have to knock on somebody's door at 2 o'clock in the morning while they're having a wild party and say, hey, could you turn the music down? And what I was finding as I was getting into those situations is that I would become very anxious and very nervous and scared, and my heart rate would go up. And I would experience these kind of physiological responses to the stress of having to have those conversations. And it would affect my ability to be able to have those conversations. So I would muster up the courage to knock on the door, but by the time the door opened, I was so stressed, I was so nervous and anxious and scared that I wasn't able to form a sentence. I would sometimes speak in gibberish. So, the door would open and the 4 volleyball players standing 6'6" over my diminutive stature would look down at me, and my intention was to ask them to turn down the music, but the words would end up being something like, please don't music, stop, bad noise, thank you. And then I'd walk away. And I couldn't figure out why that was happening because I was previously good at talking to people. And when I would go to like my teaching clinicals, I'd have a similar experience. My cooperating teachers would grade me well on putting together a lesson plan and having creative presentation and being kind of an entertaining teacher, but I'd get lousy marks on classroom management. And my cooperating teachers would say, hey, the kids are out of control. You're not controlling your class. And that aspect of it was foreign to me, and not just foreign, it was stressful and anxiety inducing. And kind of as I progressed through my career, I little by little kind of built those skills. But when you don't really have a framework or a process or a structure to kind of put that on, building it from scratch out of your own improvisation can be really challenging. And so as I started working in law enforcement and started training police officers, I began to kind of look at this concept of why people lose their minds, for lack of a better word, when they're attempting to have a challenging conversation with someone or engaging in enforcement or a confrontation. What is it about that makes us malfunction? And these kinds of conversations can be in all kinds of different contexts. So, for a faculty member, it could be a student who's disruptive in your classroom. It could be that student who's sitting in the back row, busily Instagramming while you're delivering a meaningful lecture. And you want that behavior to stop, but you're not quite sure how to approach that interaction. And for some of us, including me, the thought of that interaction is anxiety inducing. And so whether it's, hey, you haven't been showing up for class, or I'm concerned about your grades, or is everything going okay in your life? These kinds of conversations can be really anxiety inducing for the people initiating them. They're also anxiety inducing for the folks on the receiving end of them too. And there's a reason for that. And part of understanding how to manage these conversations is understanding kind of the psychological and physiological impacts of that anxiety, of that stress related to these conversations. So like when I work with police officers and we talk about de-escalation, this is the point from which we start that conversation. This idea that our brains can find themselves in a battle between our cognitive intellect, our forebrain, our computer that's responsible for developing language and problem solving and doing quadratic equations and writing poetry, that is generally in charge of what's going on. And then the visceral side of ourselves that is more kind of animal, reactive. It's the run, hide, fight. It's the response, the emotional response that is triggered by someone responding to us negatively. So when I approach the student who's Instagramming in the back of the class and the response I get is, I pay your salary, or it's paid 30 grand a year to go here. I can Instagram in the back of your class if I want. That there's a visceral response to being spoken to that way that triggers emotions, anger, embarrassment, fear, frustration. And that those visceral triggers, they begin to cause a cognitive shift. So what we want to try to do is maintain control in our cognitive frontal lobe. We want to keep the computer on, because if we're going to be in a conversation with someone, if we're going to try to problem solve, having that computer engaged allows us to hear what they're saying to us, process that information in a meaningful way and not a reactive, visceral, emotional way, in a logical, rational way, and then be able to make choices in terms of the language we use and the techniques we use to be able to problem solve with that person rather than argue or be in a confrontation. We want to have a conversation. And the only way we could do that is to keep that computer engaged and not give up control to that visceral animal side of the brain. And it's hard to do that because we've got 10,000 years of evolution that tells us when we're going into a confrontation, if we're back in the caveman days, if I'm going into a confrontation with members of another tribe or the saber-toothed tiger that we're trying to hunt, my body doesn't need high-level cognitive processes. It needs to be dumb, fast, and strong. So as our stress increases, our brain naturally shifts from intellectual problem solver, language generator, to just being dumb, fast, and strong. But being dumb, fast, and strong doesn't help us to be good problem solvers or to be good communicators. So we need to somehow counteract the natural, biological, primordial urge to shift gears and become that big, dumb, strong human and stay our intellectual, cognitive selves. Generally, the way we do that is by keeping our heart rate down, because as that stress comes up and the heart rate goes up, we get the adrenaline and the hormones and everything else starts shooting off, and that's what causes that brain chemistry to switch from smart to dumb. Now, the challenge here is that we cannot manually control our heart rate, but we know that as the heart rate goes up, we become dumber, stronger, and faster. We start to lose our ability to think clearly, formulate language, problem solve. There's all kinds of other physiological responses. Sometimes your hands shake. If you've had an argument with someone, you walk away, your hands are trembling. You have an issue with your fine motor skills. Your field of vision can contract. You can have auditory exclusion, so you're literally not hearing things if you're getting excited. So the mission is to try to lower that heart rate down to the point where we are maintaining control of the cognitive faculties that we need to problem solve with someone. And the way we do that is by tapping into our breathing in order to regulate our heart rate. So when I train police officers, if they're going in on a hot call, if they're going in on that violent domestic and they can hear crashing furniture behind the door, as they approach that door, we want them to stop, take a deep breath in, hold it for a couple of seconds, and let that breath out. I do this all the time. You know, someone, when you're in an interaction with someone that you know is kind of going off the rails, or you're going to go into an interaction, maybe I'm calling in an employee and I'm going to deliver some feedback that I know that may not be well received by that employee, and that I may be provoking an emotional reaction. So before I do that, before we sit down, I'm going to take a deep breath and make sure that my heart rate is as low as it can be, and as I am as calm as I can be, so that I'm able to look at my notes and prepare what and deliver the message that I've prepared to deliver, knowing that that employee might react adversely to that message and fire off some stuff at me that could provoke a visceral reaction. And if I find that that's happening, I'm going to stop again and try to take a deep breath and manage my stress, manage my anxiety, so that I can keep that cognitive computer engaged. Part of the trick of this is being able to kind of step outside your body. You know, when you approach the student who's in the back of the class Instagramming and you say, "Hey, Bobby, could you do me a favor and put your cell phone away? This is an important lecture that's going to be relevant, you know, to your success in this class." And he goes, and his response is, "Hey, you know, I paid 35 grand a year. If I want to sit in the back of this class for 35 grand a year in Instagram, then, you know, that's what I'm going to do." That's going to probably be offensive. That's going to probably provoke a visceral reaction. You're going to be offended. You're going to maybe be scared by that, maybe angered by that, maybe embarrassed by that. But what we need to do in properly managing these conversations is recognize that the globbity-gook that Bobby's throwing back at us may not be really what he means. It may just be kind of the junk words that are the result of his visceral reaction to being embarrassed or to being scared about flunking the class because maybe he's in over his head academically. And to be able to parse out the globbity-gook and be able to recognize what the real meaning behind that is, that Bobby is really reacting to the fact that he's embarrassed and it's uncomfortable to be called out. And so we process that then and we respond to that rather than the language or the specific insult or the specific junk that might be coming back at us. So to say, I understand this is an expensive institution and this is probably embarrassing, you know, to be called out by me in front of the class. And it's not my intention to embarrass you. I just want you to be as successful as you can in this class. And engaging in the lectures is really the best way to do that. So keeping it rational, keeping it calm, not letting your emotional impulse drive the conversation, not letting his emotional prompts drive your emotional impulse and affect the conversation, is how we are able to continue to problem solve and work the problem. If he fires off viscerally at you, jerk, idiot, liberal professor, blah, 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 blah. And you receive that input and then viscerally respond back to him. Well, you know what? Blah, 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 blah. Then you could end up in what we call, when we work with the cops, the goofy loop. So you go and ask the student to put on their mask and they say, no, I'm not wearing my mask. And you say, yeah, put on your mask. No, I'm not putting on my mask. Yeah, put on your mask. You're now in a goofy loop. You're not communicating. You're not problem solving. You're just kind of firing missiles at each other. And, we do this in our personal lives. We do this with friends. We do this with significant others, where you're just in a shooting match. You're not problem solving. You're not communicating. You're not trying to accomplish anything. You're just bashing your emotional heads together for the sake of trying to one up each other. The goofy loop is not a good place to be. And if you find yourself in it, that's the time to take a deep breath and go, okay, need a different approach. This is not the way to do things. So one of the things we're going to talk about is kind of a structure, a toolkit to use to have these challenging conversations with people. And I found this super helpful as an RA, as a student teacher, as a police officer, knowing that when I get into one of these conversations and my anxiety is going to be heightened, knowing that I've got kind of a map so that I'm not totally improvising, because to try to totally improvise a problem-solving conversation when you're at stress level 100, it's really difficult because the computer's not keeping up with you. So to be able to kind of put a roadmap or a structure is going to help you kind of map out your strategy to have this conversation. And what we find is that most people overall, and between my experience in education, higher education, and law enforcement, most people, I'll go over 90%, are inherently programmed to be compliant when you ask them to do something. So whether you're an instructor or whether you're an RA or whether you're a police officer and you nicely ask someone to do something, most people are just going to do it, period. So the odds of you needing to kind of engage in a process to negotiate them into doing it probably isn't going to happen if you just approach them nicely and ask. They're going to do it right out of the gate. There's a smaller group of people, let's say 1 in 10, who are going to be resistant to that initial ask. Most of those people, 95%, we can get them where we need them to be by handling them properly, by treating them with dignity and respect and communicating with them rather than arguing with them. And that's where I'm going to give you this 10 steps, this kind of roadmap to having these difficult conversations. Now, a lot of this material is adapted from a program called Verbal Judo, which is from back in like the 80s or 90s, from a guy named Dr. George Thompson. He was a cop who was also a martial artist. And he used to, in his initial weeks and months out on the patrol beat, he would solve problems by using force instead of by talking. And that was causing some significant problems for him in his career. He'd ask somebody to do something, and when they didn't do it, he would then use force to get them to accomplish his lawful objectives, which was legal, probably, but wasn't good for community relations, and it wasn't good for his career. And so he kind of took a step back and said, how can I decrease the likelihood of having to pull out my baton and increase the likelihood of getting someone to comply and maybe even thank me at the end of the conversation? So he came up with this verbal judo program, and I've adapted some of this material from that. So let's take, for example, asking a student in the hallway who's not wearing a mask to put a mask on. The way we would approach that using this 10-step model is to begin by simply identifying yourself, and not in a, like, for instance, if I'm going to identify myself to a student who I will then ask to put a mask on, I'm not going to identify myself as, I am Mike Zegadlo, Chief of Police of the Lewis University Police Department, badge number 100. I'm going to be a human being, and I'm going to talk like a human being. So instead of all that, I'm going to say, hi, I'm Mike from the police department, or hi, I'm Mike from LUPD. I'm not even going to throw my title in there because it's not relevant. I'm me from this place. I'm the guy named Mike who works at the police department. It's casual, it's human, it's warm, it's inviting. So, you know, I'm Professor Bob from the biology department. And then instead of activating a conversation by saying, hey, come here, or hey, you, hey, come over here, I need to talk to you. Invite a conversation, do it interrogatively. Hi, I'm Mike from the police department. Do you mind if I talk to you for a minute? That approach automatically is diffusing, and it's giving the other person some control over what's going to happen next. And pretty much everybody out of politeness is going to say, oh yeah, sure, what's up? And then you tell them why you're talking to them. Hi, I'm Mike from the police department. Do you mind if I talk to you for a second? You know, I haven't met you before. What, do you mind telling me your name? Having someone's name allows you to demonstrate to them that you recognize them as an individual and that you respect them and that you treat them with dignity. So they're no longer, hey, you, or random student, or dude, or guy, or who, or whatever. But now you're Bob. You know, I haven't met you before. I'm Mike from the police department. Do you mind telling me your name? Oh, Bob. Appreciate that, Bob. Look, the reason I'm talking to you today is because we have these public safety measures in place, which include wearing a mask when you're indoors. And I noticed you don't have your mask on, and I was just hoping that you'd go ahead and mask up for us today so that we can kind of all keep the campus safe. Now, 9 out of 10 people with an approach like that, and I've done this out on campus. Now, granted, I have a badge and gun, so perhaps there's an implied compliance there, but 9 out of 10 people with that kind of approach are going to go, oh, sorry, man, and put their mask right back on. Oh, I just forgot. I was coming from the dining hall or whatever. I was coming from outside, and they put their mask on. So most of the time, that's as far as you have to go. Just be nice, be friendly. Now, there might be some people who it's not clicking. The next thing you could try to do is maybe clarify why they're not doing the thing you want them to do, or maybe they have a good excuse for it. So you might say something like, oh, you know, maybe you left your mask out in your car, or maybe you left your mask, is your mask in your book bag maybe? And then if you're gonna like provide them a reason for not doing the thing you want them to do, provide a solution. Make sure you're locked and loaded with a solution. So if you say, oh, maybe did you happen to, maybe you left your mask in the car? Oh yeah, I left my mask in the car. No problem. We got a whole bunch of them down in the dean's office. I'll walk down there with you. Oh, there's a dispenser right down the hall. Let's go grab one for you. And then you could solve that problem. Again, you know, 90-something% of people at this point are going, oh yeah, thank you, appreciate it. I'll take one out of the dispenser and put it on. So is there any other information? Is there anything else you need to know now if this person's still resistant? You know, maybe there's a medical exemption, or maybe there's some other contextual information that you need to gather that might be a reason they're not wearing a mask. If they're still not getting with the program and they are someone who should be wearing a mask, your next step is to not threaten them, but to just explain kind of the 2 ways that this can go down. You know, I kind of put it in that frame. Look, I want to get back to teaching class. You want to get back to studying with your friends over there. All I need you to do is put the mask on. If you're not going to do that, you know, this could turn into something else. You know, maybe I've got to report this to student conduct, and that turns into a whole thing. I don't want that. You don't want that. So if I could just get you to put the mask on, we can both go our separate ways, and this will be all over. And again, every time you add one of these extra layers to the problem solving structure, you're moving the needle further and further in terms of the statistical likelihood of someone complying. Very few people are going to argue with you all the way down to number 10 on this 10-step program. But let's say perhaps you've given the options, you've explained, look, the reason why we want you to wear a mask is we're trying to keep everybody safe. And if we can keep everybody safe and healthy, we can continue to operate in the very special way that we operate here at Lewis. You know, otherwise we're going to all be back on online classes, and we're going to all be back off campus, and we're not going to be able to see each other and walk around campus and kind of enjoy this real-time interactive experience. So if we all work within the public health guidelines and wear masks, we're going to stay safe and keep our caseload down, and we're going to hit this thing out of the park. So now you've you've explained, you've empathized. Look, I don't even like wearing a mask. It makes me feel kind of restricted and stuff, but I understand it's a sacrifice I'm making to promote public safety on campus, or to promote public health on campus. So you've empathized, you've explained, you've kind of given them the, if you don't, then this might happen without sounding threatening. And if they're still not with the program, the last thing I like to do to kind of draw the line in the sand is just say, look, is there anything else I can do to get you to just put that mask on? And sometimes the response to that might surprise you. Yeah, if you just shut up, I'll put the mask on. Cool, I'm out. And then you walk away. You've accomplished your goal. Don't take it personally. Don't have a visceral reaction to being asked to shut up. You've accomplished your goal. You got them to put the mask on. Fine, I'll shut up. I'm walking away. Put your mask on. Thank you. And if you get all the way down to number 10 and they're still not doing it, then you've done all you can do. There is no more expectation. There is no more, you're not going to forcibly hold them down and put the mask on. You're going to go to whatever that consequence was that you explained in step 8. So I understand we can't come to an agreement about your mask. I'm just going to report this over to the dean or to student conduct or whoever it is you're going to report this to, and then walk away. You're done. You've done all you can do. But very rarely are you going to get that far down. And the vast majority of the time, if you introduce yourself, explain why you're asking the question, and ask nicely and treat people with dignity and respect, they're going to do what you want them to do, even if they don't want to do it. So a couple of phrases that I've found to be helpful in these kinds of situations, like I talked about, excuse me, may I talk to you, instead of, hey, you, what can I do to help get you where we need to get you? And that could be a student who's struggling in class and you're trying to intervene on them academically. What can I do to help this? How can we move this forward? For your safety and mine, I'd like you to wear a mask. Could I ask you to do this for me? Would you do it for me? Could you help me with this? Those are all kind of peace promoting, problem solving phrases. You look like a reasonable person. I can tell you're smart. I can tell you're intelligent. You understand what's going on. People really, that makes people feel good to be told that. And it's a sign of respect. So sometimes, even if you don't think the person's reasonable, if you think the person's being unreasonable, saying, look, I can tell you're a reasonable person, and we're really communicating effectively. I just want you, for your safety and mine, put the mask on. And then in the bottom box there in the gray, we have some responses to if they're firing missiles at you. I hate this place and all these rules. I appreciate that there are a lot of rules. And frankly, these mandates with the governor and stuff, they're changing all the time. It's really hard to keep up with. But look, we're doing the best we can to maintain a healthy, safe campus. So work with me on this. It's okay to empathize. It's okay to recognize, yeah, this is challenging for all of us, but here's what we need to do to make it work. Now, on this topic, there's some things I don't want you to say to people, because these things are not helpful, and they're often provoked by that visceral reaction. So you see somebody doing something, you go, hey, you come here, as opposed to, hey, partner, I'm Mike from the police department. Do you mind if I talk to you a second? What's your name? That, hey, you come here, automatically you're starting to fight with somebody. Don't tell people to calm down. If you've ever been told to calm down, you know that does not calm you down. It will not cause someone to calm down if you tell them to calm down. It tells them, hey, you're being irrational, you're being hysterical, you're out of control. That's what you're actually telling someone when you tell them to calm down. And people don't like to hear that. That makes them more angry. That causes a visceral reaction when you tell someone to calm down. So instead of telling them to calm down, say something like, take a deep breath. I know this is upsetting to you. I want to work with you. I want to hear everything you're saying. So just work with me and take a deep breath and let me hear everything you have to say. So you can do some things in terms of modeling your own calmness to help them reflect back on you. I'm not going to tell you again that, I used to get that from my dad a lot, but that you're writing a check that you may not be able to cash. So what happens if they don't do it after you say, I'm not going to tell you again? What's the next consequence? You've kind of painted yourself into a corner there. Be more reasonable. That's like calm down. If I tell you to be more reasonable, I'm telling you you're being unreasonable and irrational and hysterical and out of control. And again, you're just going to upset people when you say that. because those are the rules. You can explain a rule. You can point out the fact that there is a rule and then say why the rule exists. Look, we have these mandates from the governor in the state of Illinois. And the reason for that is because we're trying to promote an overall environment of public health. And we want people to be healthy and to get through the semester. But don't just throw it on the rules, because that's lazy. Things like, what's your problem? What do you want me to do about it? Those are confrontational, and they're not going to help. They're not problem-solving phrases. They're missiles, and we don't want to shoot missiles because you're going to get missiles right back at you. So ultimately, we want to manage our own anxiety, manage our own excitement, manage our own visceral reaction, control our own behavior, focus on problem solving, treat people with dignity and compassion and respect as humans, and they're going to respond in a warm way. Civility weakens resistance and opens the eyes. I tell cops like tactical stuff, so I tell cops it's actually tactical to be nice. You're less likely to have an incident if you're nice to people, as opposed to being pushy. So that kind of captures the first half of this as it relates to having difficult conversations with people and some tools that might help facilitate some of those difficult conversations. The other thing I want to talk about is when those difficult students begin to show signs that maybe this is more than just someone who's difficult. Maybe this is someone who we need to be concerned about. Perhaps someone that needs to be referred to the assessment and care team. Perhaps someone who needs additional services. Perhaps, worst case scenario, someone who may be on a pathway to violence, who may be moving in a direction that will result in a violent act coming from that person. So this slide gives us two different lists of risk factors that we can consider. What I want everyone to be aware of, though, is that when we're doing threat assessment, it's based on a totality of the circumstances. It's like building a puzzle. And the more pieces we get, and sometimes stepping back from the puzzle a little bit to get kind of that 30,000 foot view is helpful to put that into perspective. So we shouldn't hone in on one specific behavior or one specific risk factor or one specific observable thing and say, holy cow. We need to look at the broad perspective. We need to understand everything in context, and we need to kind of fit these pieces together to begin to assess whether or not this is someone that we're concerned about. Most of our shooters who develop along this pathway to violence begin from a point of grievance. So these are generally people who have an external locus of control. They see that the world is kind of battering them about. They're not responsible for their own success or failure. They're the victims of these external forces. That tends to result in them developing a sense of grievance over something, over sometimes a number of things. That grievance might be the junior high algebra teacher that gave him a bad grade, or the unrequited love of their crush who's not reciprocating their affection. That could be a sense of grievance. It could be a political grievance. But that sense of grievance that they grab onto and that kind of festers and becomes all consuming is kind of the seed from which the tree of violence could grow. We know a lot of people who have grievance around here. Just having grievance, again, one item doesn't mean that they're a threat, but most of them have this grievance that evolves into something else. Domestic issues, and that could be at home with mom and dad, that could be with significant other or spouse, that could be being a victim of domestic issues or a perpetrator of domestic issues. So any of that stuff is kind of one of our checks in the checkbox of our totality of the circumstances. The Secret Service gives us this list of life stressors on the left side of the screen there. Work and school, so they're on academic probation, they're on disciplinary probation. At work, they're on a performance improvement plan, last chance agreement. Family, romantic, or personal stuff. So their spouse is leaving them, significant other is leaving them, big relationship breakup, contact with law enforcement. They're on their third DUI. They're getting pulled over all the time. Financial stuff. They're unable to pay their bills. Their car's getting repossessed. Their house is getting foreclosed on. Those are significant stressors. So again, the more of those check boxes we have, the more likely we have someone who could be on a pathway to violence. One of those things, even a couple of those things, isn't necessarily a problem. But as we start to formulate a more clear picture, these things start to add up. Threatening communication is really important. So 93%, almost all of our shooters threaten somebody, either overtly, face-to-face, via text message, on social media. If you encounter a community member, a student, or an employee who's making threats in one way or another, that's something that needs to be elevated. That's something that should be coming to the assessment and care team or to the police department. Similarly, 3/4 of our shooters elicited concern from others. So if you're all sitting around the water cooler talking about dude, there could be concern about dude. You know, if your students are all huddled and they're talking about a particular student and how concerned they are, that's something that that should attract your attention. Mental health issues. This is a tricky one because we've got lots of students and employees who are managing mental health issues in a reasonable and productive and successful way. So just because someone is depressed or bipolar or has OCD or has anxiety doesn't mean they're a threat, but it is a variable in your threat assessment equation in that, you know, 2/3 of our shooters did have some mental health presentation, previous criminal history, substance abuse, and then fixation on anything, you know, fixation on violent media, fixation on guns, fixation on that unrequited crush that they're pursuing, stalkers, that kind of stuff. Fixation is a variable in your threat assessment equation. Other factors, prior history of violence, kind of address that. Elevated mood or frustration, or kind of a disproportionate reaction to the environment. So you give a student a test paper back with an F on it, and they pound on the desk and say, "This is bullshit, I hate this place," and they react in such a way that gives you an icky feeling in the pit of your stomach and makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. If people are behaving in that way, your body is reacting in that way, that's your body telling you this is not a normal reaction. This is not a predictable reaction. That's cause for concern. Follow your gut. It's there for a reason. There's 10,000 years of evolution behind that icky feeling in the pit of your gut. Support systems and family functioning are really important as both a risk and protective factor. So if they have someone that they can talk to and rely on and go to and supports them, that's great news. If they're all alone in the world, that's more cause for concern. And suicidal ideation, similar to mental health, doesn't necessarily mean that they're likely to be violent, but it is common in the profile of people who end up doing acts of violence. So, but just because somebody wants to hurt or kill themselves doesn't mean they want to hurt and kill someone else. We've got to go back to our totality of the circumstances and see where that suicidal ideation fits in the greater context. So what can I do? You got to be situationally aware. You have to be able to notice and observe some of the things I just talked about. So we have to kind of broaden our visual perspective a little and maybe step back from the thing that we're focused on at the moment. I'm focused on my lesson. I'm focused on this experiment. I'm focused on this thing I'm doing right now, but there's all this stuff going on in the periphery that maybe I'm not observing. So kind of dial up your situational awareness, pay better attention, listen to what's being said by your students when you're not necessarily directly interacting with them. Be a good listener, express concern and care, be a good human. I mean, the thing that I've been affiliated with Lewis one way or another all of my adult life. And the one thing that connects me deeply to this place is the fact that we care about each other. We have an ethic of caring for our students and our community members that I've not experienced in any other organization that I've interacted with. And that's what makes this an exceptional place. And that's why we do well in handling students and community members who are struggling, because we genuinely care. So do that. Be a listener. Let somebody talk to you. You don't have to solve all their problems, but be there for them. And if you can connect them with resources and services, that's great. Trust your gut. If you get that icky feeling, there's a reason for it. And then make a referral to the numerous resources we have available, whether it's the assessment and care team, whether it's the counseling center. Hey, maybe you got a student who's stressed out because they can't pay their bill, and you connect them with Janine over on financial aid to see if we can maybe work on their financial aid package so that we can retain them, or so that we can minimize that stress related to finances so that they can focus more on their academics and be successful. Wouldn't that be nice? I'm going to talk a little bit about our assessment and care team, which is our behavioral intervention team or threat assessment team. These teams came into being after the Virginia Tech and NIU shootings. And in Illinois, they're actually mandated by law to be in place. And they're really helpful. They do good work. This is work that we do on a daily basis. And the community is really good about utilizing the team. And what we've found in our work is that the majority of what we do on the assessment and care team is connecting students who need resources with the resources they need. I don't know that we've prevented an active shooter, but we've definitely helped students who need help. We've definitely connected students who need resources with the resources they need. Sometimes it's just a couple of counseling sessions. Sometimes, like I said, it's a meeting with financial aid. Sometimes Mary DeGraw steps in and does some cool scheduling ninja stuff and helps somebody with their academics. But those referrals pay good dividends in terms of student success. So the team is multidisciplinary. There's people from public safety, there's people from health and counseling, there's people from academics, there's dean of students, director of residence life, student conduct, HR are all part of the group. And when the referrals come into that team, each of those team members has their area of expertise that they're able to weigh in on, but the whole team has been cross-trained in these concepts of threat assessment and risk, harm risk management concepts. So we all speak that kind of common language, but then we all have our own areas of expertise that we can evaluate as it relates to a particular case. So when these cases come in, we all kind of run our own independent checks. And then as a group, kind of get together and say, here's what I have, here's the police contacts with this person. Oh yeah, well, Res Life has had these contacts with this person. And we kind of piece that all together, and then we can formulate a plan to help manage what this student or other community member is going through. And like I said, we've been very successful with that. The community's been great about sending the referrals in. We manage a pretty robust caseload from year to year. And we've had a lot of success of connecting students with the help that they need. So when should you tap into the ACT? You've tried to resolve the problem with the student and it hasn't worked. You're concerned about their welfare or maybe someone else's welfare. The person is asking you for help that's outside of your wheelhouse. So, you're not a licensed counselor or a social worker, and this student's struggling with mental health issues and wants to come to your office and sit and have you counsel them. That might be out of your wheelhouse. So perhaps a referral is in order there. Or you've referred this person before in the past and things aren't getting better, or maybe they're getting worse. That's another opportunity to make a referral into the ACT. When you go to the ACT website, and you can find that by going to the Lewis website, you can click under emergency planning, under quick links, you can type in assessment and care team in the search bar. You're going to get to one of these two buttons, report a concern about a student or report a concern about faculty, staff, or other. If you click that button, you're going to get this form, which takes you into our Maxient system. And you can put whatever you want in the form. You can be anonymous. I prefer that you don't be anonymous because sometimes we want to call you up and ask some clarifying questions. Hey, can you tell me more about this piece? Can you tell me about this connection? And that helps us put our puzzle pieces together to figure out how we're going to help the student. So, but if you'd prefer to be anonymous, you certainly can. And most of the fields on that form are not mandatory. So you give us what you give us and we'll work with whatever you give us. The more you give us, the easier it is to help solve the problem. When you submit that, it automatically dings on the phones, on my phone, on Kathy Slattery's phone, Adam Kubiak, Director of Residence Life, Jill Whitaker, Director of Counseling, Chella Dufour in HR, Mary DeGraw. So kind of the key players on the team are getting a notification as soon as you hit submit. Now, if you have something that's an emergency, if you have a student who's actively suicidal or homicidal or someone who needs immediate help, you should call the police directly because we're here and awake and on patrol and around 24/7. If you put in an ACT referral at 3 o'clock in the morning, my phone's going to go ding, but I'm probably not going to wake up and see that until my alarm goes off at 5. So if you need something urgent, call directly to the police department if it's something that needs attention right away. And then doing a referral form it creates a case. So the system will automatically generate a case number and kind of put that person on our radar so that we need to follow up with them. We know we need to follow up with them. So I'm going to give you these kind of in closing, these 10 questions to help differentiate if you've got someone who might be on a pathway to violence versus someone who might just need other kind of help, kind of give you a little quick and dirty 10-question threat assessment. Number one, what are the subject's motives and goals? What are they up to? What are they hoping to accomplish? Have there been any communications suggesting ideas or intent for harm or violence? Have they articulated that? That's a pretty big red flag. Has the subject shown any inappropriate interest in or identification with targeted attackers? So are they Googling, Columbine, active shooter? Are they, is there a fixation on some of that stuff? Do they have the capacity to carry out an attack? So we have our howlers who like to run their mouth, and we have our prowlers who actually might do something, and being able to figure out what you're dealing with there. Someone who's just running their mouth or someone who literally has the capacity to do harm. That's an important variable in the threat assessment equation. Are they hopeless, desperate, or in despair? This doesn't necessarily mean mentally ill, but if they're in those, in that moment of hopelessness or desperation or despair, that's someone that we probably need to be connecting with to see how we can get them out of that situation. Do they have a trusting relationship with another responsible adult? Remember, that's our risk and protective factor. If they do, that's good news. If they don't, that's a check mark in the bad box. Do they see violence as an acceptable problem solving? Do you hear them say things like, man, I'd like to get that professor out in the parking lot? Or, they're talking about a political topic and they say, we should just bomb Afghanistan into a parking lot. People say goofy stuff like that all the time. But if violence as a problem solving strategy is forefront in their mind, that's a cause for concern. Is their story consistent with their actions? Again, this kind of goes back to that howler-prowler concept. Are there other people concerned about dude? So if you're not the only one expressing concern and there are other people expressing concern, that's in and of itself cause for concern. And then what other circumstances might affect the likelihood of violence? So if you can kind of run through these 10 questions and at the end of those 10 questions feel like, things are pretty good, then okay. But if at the end of these 10 questions, you're like, I don't know, that's an opportunity for a phone call. Now, you don't have to only refer people directly through the ACT program. You may pick up the phone and call any one of us. People call all the time. And we may ultimately, when we get that call, at the end of the phone call, say, after talking to you, I would like you to put in that ACT referral, because that's going to kind of spark the whole process. It's going to trigger the system. So we may say that at the end, but don't ever hesitate to pick up the phone and call me or Mary DeGraw or Kathy Slattery or Jill Whitaker and say, hey, I got this thing. Can I get 5 minutes or 10 minutes of your time? We do those phone calls and emails all the time. Don't hesitate to do that. That's what we're here for. And again, our primary mission is helping students, connecting students who need resources with the resources they need. And that's, we're not referring someone to the ACT doesn't mean you're putting them on some kind of, we're gonna come with the trench coats and the straight jackets and the butterfly nets. That's not how any of this works. We look at what's going on in the student's life. What are the challenges to this student's academic and personal success, and what resources can we bring to bear that haven't already been brought to bear to help put that student back on a pathway of academic and personal success. And that's how 95% of our cases get resolved. It's a simple but effective system and process. That's all the content I have for you. I appreciate anyone who's taken the time to look at this. Was supposed to do this live as a Teaching Tuesday, but we had a pretty low enrollment for it. So I told Mike Cherry I would just make a recording and people could look at it at their leisure. If you have any questions, I'm at 815-836-5021 or extension 5021, or you can call the police department and they can track me down any time of day, 24/7, 365. Thank you and be safe.